Good afternoon. Welcome to the Minnesota Learning Commons Monthly Professional Development Webinar. Today's presentation is on Think Your Way Out of the Problem, presented by Joshua Beal and Denise Gorsline. If you enjoyed today's presentation, make sure to join us for our next webinar on December 12th, Building Quality Online Experiences, presented by 4 speakers from the University of St. Thomas. For more information, you can visit the Minnesota Learning Commons website at z.umn.edu/MNLC. I would also like to note that today's session is being recorded, so we can upload it to YouTube for those who were not able to join us for the live webinar. And with that, I will hand everything over to Josh and Denise.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to go ahead and share our screen. So give us a brief moment here. Okay.
All right. Can everybody hear us okay? All right. So my name is Denise Gorsline, and at the time we started Think Tanks, I was an interim dean for the College of Business and Innovation. I'm currently a faculty member in communication studies, and ironically, Josh is the next interim dean for the College of Business and Innovation. And we worked on this together with a third colleague, Pam McGee, who is part of the professional management program. So what we hope to do today is talk about kind of our different perspectives on how this worked, because what you think of this probably depends a little bit on where you sit. We'll talk about the process we use, some challenges we ran into, and how you might try it. So at the beginning, you have to have a problem to solve, but you want to solve it in a way that involves a lot of people, uses expertise, and follows a process. Because we all know that if we don't follow some process, we just start throwing stuff at the wall and hope something sticks. And one thing that I think is really great about design thinking is it is not rigid in that you can't discuss a lot of things, but it is a process orientation. So I'll tell you in a few minutes what problem we tried to solve, because interestingly enough, it's a problem that we keep hearing about at the university. It's not one that's gone away. So the question is, what is a think tank concept? I think think tank is probably not a new term to you, but maybe not one you've thought of in higher education. I think we think of think tank with research. I used to think of them as government or one-off government groups where retired senators and representatives went to work. But there's a ton of think tanks around the world, 6,500. So that's just to give you the background that this isn't really a new concept, but our application of it is new. So again, like all of your campuses, you probably have a whole bunch of things you'd like to make better. And really primarily through Pam's initiative, we got started with this think tank model. We had a small group, I want to say it was less than 10, who addressed a university-wide issue. They had a problem statement they were given, and this was all revised, reviewed, prioritized at our various organizational levels. It wasn't really a committee, so we didn't deal with union or faculty association appointments, and it wasn't a task force, it was something else is the best way I would explain it. We, because our president, Ann Blackhurst, when she became president, looked at Lencioni's work, we incorporated some of that into this. And if you think of books like, I think it's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is the one that I can remember off the top of my head. So so we started this think tank, and I'm going to just introduce what design thinking is, and then we'll transition to Josh talking about kind of how it went from what design thinking is to how we used it here at Moorhead. So design thinking is a process of creating and testing innovative ideas to solve a problem. I think this is very unique because of the testing innovative ideas. And as you'll hear later, and we've all been, I'm going to guess that many of you on this call have been on task forces before, and you kind of come with a presupposed definition to the problem or solution to the problem, and you go with that solution. This is very different in that you create and test a variety of ideas to try to find the best. So the design thinking provides people with a general framework of how you're going to go about solving the problem. And it's, I would say, the guideline for the facilitation. And as we talk more about this, you'll see that facilitation is one of the necessary pieces to make this work.
So in the initial rollout of this, our facilitator, Pam McGee, and I was one of the members of the design thinking group when I was on faculty. So there's a general 5-step methodological process that design thinking follows. It starts with empathizing, and that is where you as a design thinking team member understand your audience, or stated differently, you might say, I'm understanding my customer or understanding the needs of my stakeholders. So in our case, we were trying to design a solution for our campus. So we took time to talk to some of the key stakeholders we identified as a group across our campus in an effort to try to empathize with the challenges they were facing. The next thing we did was, based upon that research and our understanding we developed, we began to sort of construct a perspective of what we thought the need was. So what did we, after talking to dozens and dozens of people, what did we settle on in terms of what was the core challenge or the core problem we're trying to solve or find a solution for? The next step of this is the ideation process, where we basically ideate. And as a group and in subgroups, we were brainstorming ideas. And the important thing to know about this is, as we went through each one of these phases of this methodology of design thinking, everything was very much time bound. So we didn't just allow ourselves to marinate in the ideation process for hours and hours and weeks and days. It was all very much time bound, and that created a sense of urgency with our group. So during this ideation process, if you're familiar with sort of classic brainstorming techniques and group meetings and management, anything was on the table. We didn't dismiss any of the ideas. We sort of let each idea come forth, and as more ideas came forth, new ones sort of spawned from that, and we sort of walked the dog, so to speak. The next phase of design thinking process that's really important is, beyond just coming up with ideas, we started to coalesce around, okay, well, these are the ideas that are sort of sticking for us. These are the ideas that sort of seem to add some meat in terms of a solution to our problem. So the next part of this, which makes this really distinctive as opposed to just simply brainstorming ideas, was the prototyping phase. During the prototyping phase is where we actually started creating tangible solutions or models to potentially solve the challenge or to solve the problem based upon the problem statement. So in a moment, we'll talk about kind of what we did and what that prototyping process looked like. But the point here is that it's really important that you start creating something tangible and people start getting their hands dirty. Now, beyond just generating ideas and prototypes, as a group, we then presented to some of our stakeholders, to our customers, people that would be impacted by a change such as this. So as a group, we would actually demonstrate or present, here's what we think our solution is in a very tangible, sort of hands-on way. And as part of that, we gather feedback. Now, the other thing that makes the design thinking process difficult for some groups is that you have to reconcile the reality that part of this may result in, we get to the test phase and your group of feedback, your stakeholders may say, this is an awful idea, you should not go forward. and the project may be done then and there. And we had all reconciled to that reality. And Pam had taught us that the benefit of that is that as opposed to us coming up with ideas and start going right into implementation, is that we may have just saved ourselves lots of time and money and resources by killing the project now. Right now, in our case, that did not happen, but that's what can happen out of this test phase. So again, there's a number of things that make this different from simple just brainstorming or group meetings. There's a very methodological approach to this that can lead groups through this thinking and solution process. So one of the questions that was asked initially was, why bother with a think tank? And the answer is simply disruption. In the industry of higher education, there's so much disruption in that we are sort of forced to grapple with. Anything from changing demographics to accessibility and affordability issues. The onslaught or the development of MOOCs and other sorts of massively consumable educational resources, or alternative credentialing or micro-credentialing. All these different things are forcing us as higher education to grapple with some really big, sticky issues that, frankly, we've been trying to grapple with for some period of time. And the purpose of this think tank was to force us at MSUM to try to tackle one or two of them and see where it takes us. So why is a think tank important? Well, a couple things came out of this. One of the things is that through the climate surveys that a lot of us do, this was a way to give voice to faculty or to our employees that participated in that.
So we use the Best Place to Work survey connected through the Chronicle. And we've done it now since, I think the first time we did it was when our president started, and it's probably no surprise that one of the ongoing issues whenever you do a climate survey in any level of industry is people feeling a need to give input. So that we had a great context of information to start.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that really helped when we were selling it to administration and some of the key executive sponsors that helped make this happen. So the other benefit of a think tank is that it's designed to drive towards solutions to problems, and not just average everyday problems, but really big, sticky, gnarly problems, as it's often phrased as. The other benefit of this is that it allowed administration and others to get feedback from people that are really involved with some of the challenges that were defined in the problem statement. In addition, this also helped the same group start aligning problems, solutions, and strategy together in one cohesive conversation. The other piece of this is that it gave us a tangible way to deal with some of this disruption we talked about earlier. And as a member of that think tank group, one of the other byproducts of this, why it was so important, is that, as many of you are, I'm sure, well aware of, higher education is sort of designed and structured to operate in silos. So when we started the group, very few of us knew each other. And we had, I think, as Denise said, between 8 or 9 people. And across the board, none of us really, we may have known of each other. We did not know each other. We had never worked with each other beyond just maybe we knew a name, perhaps. And that was one of the great outcomes of this training, this experience, was the fact that we started developing greater cross-departmental, college, and university collaborations that just simply weren't there before.
And this was with people who had worked here. There was the guy from English was in his first year, I think. Then we had people who had been, tenured full professors for a long time. We had not just faculty, although faculty represented the majority of the people in the group, or the group makeup.
Yep, absolutely. So what are some of the key design thinking pillars that were part of this? And I covered this a little bit earlier, but they're intended for complex problems. I mean, a think tank sort of design thinking process is not really the thing you would use to, where do we go to lunch today? Or how many sections of accounting 230 should we put in the spring, or something like that. Those are sort of just operational problems. our problem, and I'm trying to recall the exact wording of it, but it was related to some of this disruption that we're facing, and how do we start breaking down some of the artificial and actual barriers or constraints across campus to deliver more collaborative, dynamic degrees.
Right, so a great example would be, we had faculty development day here just on Monday, but it seems like a lot longer ago. And we talked about Generation Z and what they want in terms of academic programs. And so they want flexibility. They want to put together a program that reflects their unique career path and passion. And the issue of how difficult it can be to collaborate and build programs, I think, was at the heart of what the think tank addressed. And so it was trying to think beyond the traditional, how can we think beyond the traditional major in a way that benefits students, is not overcome with, we can't do that. But the issue was, I'd say, flexibility and speed in innovative academic programming.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, so clearly if that was a simple problem, it'd be solved already, right? And it's something that we all probably grapple with. If we haven't, we will be. And I think the other piece about this design thinking process and concept is that it's very much a human-centric design philosophy. So as opposed to getting a bunch of academics together and saying, what's the problem with higher education? We might all have very academic-y sort of ways of looking at it, but instead of just asking ourselves, we went to the people, some of the people that are impacted directly by some of the challenges. So the whole design of this was designed around how can we best serve those people, the humans and people, or if you want to look at it as a customer sort of a scenario, how can we best serve our stakeholders and customers? The other piece of this was, it was based upon the ideation process, sort of the free flow of ideas and prototyping. But the other piece of that's important to note is that this whole process also leverages agile project management methodologies. And so a lot of the methods that we use, if we're using something like Scrum to manage a project, a lot of those same ideation processes and methodologies are really integral to design thinking as well. And finally, the other part of this is that this whole process is designed to accelerate the normal processes. So we all know that if you ever started a degree or trying to do something innovative, it may take years to make it happen. Well, as opposed to making something that takes years, the idea is that we want to accelerate the solution process, but also the ideation process. And by bringing people together from different disparate groups, it accelerated that process a lot better.
So what did we do? We had, it was really Pam McGee, who we've mentioned, who had pretty extensive experience in design thinking. Pam's background includes time at Microsoft. She attended a variety of conferences in innovation and academics, which almost sounds like those things are impossible. And she made the proposal to put this team together, and the executive sponsorship came from right at the top. I believe if she wasn't the one to present at our cabinet, it was our academic vice president at the time, but everybody knew what was going on. Mm-hmm. So then what happened is Pam became the facilitator, and she updated the deans. She really took this training focus on what is design thinking to many parts of campus. And she had to educate people on what we were doing, because if we weren't focusing on training, we were in a delicate situation with our faculty association. But our focus was on training people in different methods to solve problems. And I honestly don't think that's like made up to get us out of trouble. That's really what it was. So it came to selecting the problem, and we talked about what our problem was. How do you innovate quickly in a historic culture? And I don't think it's just us, obviously, built around college and department structures. So that was the problem. And then a timeline was created. And part of the timeline was you couldn't miss any meetings. This group, one thing that's impressive about this group is they met on Fridays for a couple of hours at a time. And I think it was it 8 weeks? 8 weeks. So that's a pretty aggressive schedule. Then we selected the participants, and I'll just say that was done a little differently too. So in our Academic Affairs Council, the various deans at the time talked about, you know, who might be a good person from their college, but we went beyond that and talked about what we knew about these representatives and how they would interact with others. So for example, I've been here a while, so I was able to comment on, well, I know this person from this context, maybe more than their academic dean did. So we worked really hard on what's the right group at the right time for this issue. And I think from all reports, we were pretty close on how things worked. Then a kickoff meeting was scheduled. And this just goes into more, I think, more details of what we considered in terms of selecting people. And I don't want to minimize the last one. It has a sense of humor, because to take on changing what feels like a huge tradition at a minimum and structure that nobody wants to change at a maximum was really challenging.
I would also add, beyond humor, a lot of humility, because there had to be sort of this comfortability with being vulnerable and throwing an idea out there, but being humble enough to have the idea not become the solution. And but to make that happen, part of it was setting the right expectation up front, but also to Denise's point, choosing the right people is integral to making any sort of think tank or design thinking process for it to work well. You got to have the right people, the right facilitator, the right executive sponsorship, and the right problem statement.
Right, and I think that, I think this is true. I'm looking at Josh because we haven't talked about this. If you looked at this list, the list of participants, I would say it went well beyond the usual involved in change initiatives group.
Absolutely it did.
And that is part of what made it really unique. I think that while certainly people had experiences they brought with them, they also, it was a new dynamic versus a subgroup of our faculty senate or labor representatives. And from observing it like a cousin of the process versus a leader or being involved, I would say that was critical. And I would say partly we did a good job of selecting and partly we got a little lucky, to be honest.
I would say so.
It wasn't, you know, I know from talking to different people in the group, because we had a little debriefing party, you know, it was a change for some of the people in the group of how they interacted. Some of the people in the group were always used to being leaders and they had to play differently with others. So, and there definitely was healthy conflict, that's for sure. So the process we followed lays out the steps of design thinking. And I think it'd be good for Josh to talk. Well, we could talk about all of these, but especially the whole prototyping part, because to me, that's very unique in this.
Right. So you'll notice that we have 2 ideates and 2 prototypes. So we found early on that for whatever reason, our groups needed more time to sift through ideas. So we actually had 2 sessions back to back where we ideated. And the prototyping part was, to Denise's point, was integral to not just to manifesting what a solution might look like, but the prototyping actually was an extension of the ideation. So as we started building models, and to give you a sort of a mental picture of what this was like, we used Legos. There was some quilting and sewing that went on, and we actually created like a visualization of what we were describing in our minds. And that kind of also helped us extend our ideation process. And for those of you that are familiar with prototype, there's actually a vast amount of research that's been done on the use of Legos, for example, that actually help in the ideation process or help facilitate prototyping. And we end up using Legos for a lot of this and created some very creative things. So, but the prototyping, again, was integral to us manifesting the idea and making it tangible, not just for us, but as we presented it, it helped our audience and our stakeholders visualize what it is we are trying to get after.
Right, so the prototype, and you know I have pictures that I took. We should definitely add those somewhere along the line, because it's quite both entertaining, yet for anybody who's worked in academics, you'd go, I get what you're doing here. Including there was a shark representing the registrar, because her rules, or any registrar's rules, it's not about her, definitely could have brought down the initiative. So we did a run-through.
Did a run-through, a testing phase.
A testing phase, and that was probably where I became most involved. And, you know, my background is in communication, so I probably was pretty critical, although people were very appreciative. We had it was hard conversation.
It was difficult, yeah.
It was difficult, but I think once, like a lot of things, once we all got through that, oh my gosh, how'd we get all that negative feedback? Where'd we go wrong? To wait, that's right, we can do this. The group was very ready for a study day presentation to the senior leaders. I want to go back to the test, the practice, because there were a couple key things. There were several students there, and their insight was the most valuable given in many ways, and several key employers from our community. And they didn't all agree on the feedback that they gave, which was healthy and good. But what I remember most is probably the student feedback, because it was the ultimate reality test.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really good. Then we had this presentation, and this presentation was fairly brief. I want to say it was, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
Might have been a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
But it was well received. There were a lot of great questions from the people who attended, and there was good attendance. And I'm sure you've all been involved in situations where you really wanted your decision maker, top leaders there, and for whatever reason they couldn't be there. But in this case, they were. From the president to the finance person, everybody was there. So that was the presentation. That was the proposal. All right, so then we had a couple things happen that are typical kind of things that happen in universities. Pam McGee, who was certainly leading this, changed positions. She also was in an interim administrator position and went back to the classroom. And then we had a change in a number of the deans. We had a change, excuse me. We had a change in our VP for academic affairs. So we had a lot of internal disruption. I'm gonna get a drink of water.
That's okay. So, yeah, we have a lot of internal disruption, which at the time when it was happening, one of the fears we had was what's going to happen now to this think tank, and what's going to happen to the idea and the output that came from the initiative. So what did happen was everybody transitioned back. Some of us stepped into interim administrative roles, and where we've landed now is that, well, a couple things. One of the things is that the new provost here at the university was also sold on the think tank design thinking concept. And Pam McGee was given about 6 credits of release time to actually implement 2 new think tank experiences here on campus. And the first one we're doing is going to be a blend of, there's a business here in the Fargo-Moorhead area that's going to be part of it. So we're bringing some outsiders in to our think tank. We're going to be bringing some students into that as well as faculty. So it's sort of a collision of a lot of the stakeholders in one room trying to leverage this. And that's going to be happening here, hopefully this fall, blending into the spring. So we have some executive support there. We have some administrative investment. The second thing that's happened is that the think tank members from this first batch that were trained, some of them are actually going to be the participants in this next round of the think tank with this business. So that's really positive. So and across campus, the word has gotten out that this group was very effective and some unique ideas came out of it. And even some of the outputs of the think tank group, those are also still marinating and of high likelihood that they will lead to some sort of a implementation as we look forward here in the next couple of years.
So this is where, when we first did this presentation, there were 3 of us and others too, who were all in different roles. So at the time, as a member of the Dean's group, you know, I think I could speak for myself and the other deans that we felt excited about a different approach to problem solving, because all of us had been in situations that you put a lot of effort in and nothing resulted. Mm-hmm. I think Josh was a faculty member at the time, so he can tell you his perspective.
Sure. So as a faculty member, it was exciting for me because, in part because I had an opportunity to meet a bunch of other people across campus. The other thing as a faculty member, I think some of my natural sort of inclinations and how I approach things align really well with this. For example, on the Strength Finder, one of my number 2 of my strengths is ideation. So this was like the perfect world for me. And above that is strategic. So the whole idea of thinking big picture and coming up with ideas really suited me. The thing that was great about this, though, to Lisa's point earlier, we had a lot. We weren't all a bunch of strategic ideators. There were people that were sort of deep thinkers, might call themselves introverts, that contributed a great deal to this process. So it was an opportunity for me to meet people that were very different, but we were all very passionate about our jobs and this university and our students and the people impacted by what we do. So that was a lot of fun. Even one other side effect, I forgot about this, is that a number of us who enjoy doing research actually started a little research group based upon this experience. And so far, one paper I think has been submitted, another one is still in the works, and there may be some others coming from that as well. So that was some of the benefits of being a faculty member.
I think if Pam was here, I know she would talk about, we got a little lucky with the membership, and that helped her role as facilitator. Not that it wasn't selected by design, but you know, sometimes you make mistakes. I think she'd say that. She would remind everybody of the importance of executive sponsorship or executive commitment, that if this just became an initiative somebody was going off and doing and not having the right executive sponsorship or support, it wouldn't go anywhere. So just like we said a minute ago, the president was there. She, from the time this group presented their plans to now, we have a new provost. And so you had to get him involved right away. And I think the fact that all of that happened is what Pam would say is the facilitator made this work.
Absolutely. And if you ever read about any of the research behind design thinking, or if you read any of the stuff from IDEO is the organization that originally came up with this, you'll find that one of the keys beyond just having the right people and the right executive sponsorship is having the right facilitator. Because this is a different way of thinking and approaching problem solving, you need a skilled facilitator to kind of navigate and guide people through some of the sticky moments. In our group, there were moments where some people they came in and wanted to jump right to solutions because solutions are fun, solutions are tangible, but it was integral that to the success of this. We went through the process and went through sometimes the painful process of letting ideas marinate and hearing alternative perspectives and letting those things stick around, and we would grapple with them. So the grappling with those things is integral to the process and its long-term success.
So we had some things working on our side to contribute to success. There was a lot of homework that everybody had to do. And I think that got them excited and secured the commitment from the faculty, because this was new, a new way of doing things. Because of Josh's background, it probably wasn't quite as new to him as it was to everybody else. But for most of the people in the group, this was very new,
It was
a whole new approach. I think the time commitment was not, loosey-goosey. It was, this is where you have to be when, and if you can't do that, then you need to reconsider being involved. I don't think there were very many exceptions to that at all. And as you all would know, that takes incredible commitment. The president and her cabinet definitely bought into it. That was positive. We were very fortunate to have somebody who, this was not her first design thinking rodeo, you could say. And she's talked about different ways to do it. In fact, Pam McGee has mentioned that in some groups, she's done these intense weekends where they go off site, and I don't know if it was just over one weekend or an extended weekend, but her facilitation skills, her experience made a big difference. I think the union management is just, we took the approach, and I think it's a good one, of being very upfront about what was going on, not trying to be secretive or hiding anything, and that led to support. And then the students and the external audience really helped a lot too, I would say.
Absolutely. Now, beyond the successes, anytime you start making a new omelet, you break a lot of eggs. and we did. I think one of the things we ran into was a dean buy-in. And for some of us, and I would fall into this trap, I get excited by new things. And there was a concern by some that this might just be the latest shiny new object that we're just going to go chasing down, and it's not going to lead to anything. And so that was a roadblock, and something we had to sort of deal with. It took some time. The other piece of this was that from a time perspective, while the time commitment was we were very upfront with what we expected, it did take a lot of outside time. So beyond the fact we met for eight times for 2 hours in a formal way, there were a great deal of informal meetings as well, particularly as we got into the prototyping stage. That took a lot of time. The other piece of this that we debated, and I'm not sure where we settled on, to be honest with you, was the size of the group. There were some that felt that the 8 or 9 people we had was just too many, that the sweet spot may have been better around 4 or 5. And I personally go back and forth on that. I think the diversity of the group led to a better solution, and I'm not sure we would have arrived at the same place without all that diversity. But of course, the larger the group, the harder it is to facilitate and navigate that with this many people. One of the things we tried to do initially to better understand each other was we did a DISC assessment on each other. We each fill out our own, and we had a meeting where we unpacked that very briefly, but we never looped back to it. And I think that was an opportunity lost for us, because I think with all that diversity and different approaches to thinking, spending time kind of immersing ourselves in that DISC profile analysis and kind of looping back to that as we went through the rest of the experience would have probably helped smooth out some discussions at various places along the way. The other piece that was a bit of I hate to call it a failure, but was during the initial sort of test presentation. The initial test presentation actually was the side effect of our groups. We sort of fissured around into 3 different groups. And we said, well, you know what, we'll all 3 go off, do our own thing, we'll focus on one aspect of it, we'll come together, we'll sort of slam it together, and voila, we've got a presentation. Unfortunately, it pretty much sounded like a bunch of 3 different groups that slammed their presentation together. And it became there wasn't sort of a unified narrative. And that was something that forced us to go back to the drawing board a little bit on what is it exactly that we're trying to propose. So that was a strong lesson learned. It was a valuable output of the process. And finally, the final sort of roadblock we ran into was the refining of the question. Because as we got into it, as ideas started coming out, more questions emerged. And one of the things that's important early on in the process is staying true to the question, because there are so many possible questions we could try to answer. And it's important you stay focused on, here's our initial problem statement. If we uncover more problems, fantastic, but that's for a different think tank. That's for a different time. So the hard part was staying focused on the purpose of our group as time went on.
So I think the question then is, before we get questions from you, is what do we still have to figure out? Where do we stand? And we've addressed some of these. I think, so I'm just going to editorialize a little bit. Josh and I didn't talk about this. I think the hardest thing is that this is a big time commitment.
Yeah.
Both for the facilitator, but we did not in any way give reassign time or any extra compensation to anybody involved in the group. And the first time through, it was really part of Pam's job because she was working on academic innovation. And I think the faculty and staff involved loved it, but it was a significant amount of time. And to figure out how you maintain that, because what will happen now is you have another one starting, then you have another one starting, and you've got to look at a wider range of people being involved. And I think that is the thing to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the going forward and finding additional faculty and people to be involved in it. You know, as we were looking at this next round of are we bringing in some outside industry and some students together for a think tank was, well, what other faculty do we make part of this? And then we realized, shoot, do we saturate the group too much initially, or do we underestimate the amount of time it takes to get familiarized with the process? Because part of this initial group was, this is a training process. So the one of the things we have to figure out is, as we try to operationalize this more, is every sort of new experience going to involve, you know, a week and a half of training? And is that feasible? And I don't think the answer is yes, but then how do we get people up to speed on it in a very concise way?
You know, I hope that even though we've talked pretty honestly about the ups and downs, I hope that you can sense our enthusiasm for this process. And again, I would say Josh and I both are very curious people. And so this probably plays to things we like personally. I'm not sure everybody felt that way, but I think it made an impact, and it's another way to solve problems.
Yes, absolutely.
So with that, that's what we did. What would you like to know?
If you have any questions that you wanted to ask at this time, you can type it into the chat, either to all panelists or to all panelists and attendees, or feel free to try out the Q&A section of the Zoom functions as well.
I wonder if anybody's I'm glad that you found it authentic because that's definitely what we were going for.
Yes, Cindy Harrison says, thank you for such an authentic explanation of the whole process. It is very helpful. I'm going to take this time while people might be typing to remind people of our next session. Here's more information on today. And then our next webinar is going to be on December 12th. Building quality online experiences, program standards, training, and design. Feel free to visit the MNLC website at z.umn.edu/MNLC. If you have any questions, you can find our contact information there as well. We will hang out for a few more minutes just to see if anybody has any questions or comments that they wanted to share. But thank you so much to Denise and Josh for your presentation.
We enjoyed it. We enjoyed presenting it in the summer, and it was great to do it again.